This is The Fix with me, Karima Brown. We now take a look at the front pages of the weekend newspapers and what's made news headlines. This week, we are with senior eNCA reporter Erin Bates. Erin, good morning. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Peter and I have had a look through all the papers, and the story that you've covered the most this whole week is, of course, Robert McBride's explosive testimony at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Any idea why the papers is not reflecting
like
it at all? Yeah,
no, which is puzzling because he hasn't completed his evidence.
Yes.
And in fact, some of the most serious allegations we understand he will make have not arisen yet around an alleged hit squad and operatives trained in China and Russia, and yet no sign of it in the Sunday papers.
But what was interesting, of course, was he had up slides to explain how the police work, the different units, and more importantly, how, for example, IPID was systematically resisted by the police. He said there was a culture of resisting in being, accountable. One would have thought that the Sunday papers would take note of that. I mean, this is the first time we're actually looking at the state itself. I mean, we've been looking at state-owned companies, we've been looking at Bosasa, but this is actually the criminal justice system here. I mean, if you were the editor of any of these papers, where would you put Robert's story?
Well, I think what is difficult is obviously a lot of his testimony hasn't yet made under oath, and I have never had the responsibility of deciding the news agenda of the leading papers on a Sunday morning, and maybe for the better. But I do think it is a critical issue. Daily Maverick, for example, has done a lot of reporting, forecasting some of his testimony. And then, of course, we're going to hear from Johan Boysen as well, who's set to talk about the Hawks. We've heard about Anwar Dramat. We've heard about the claims that people in the Hawks who are doing their jobs are being targeted for going after high-profile political cases. And perhaps some of it has to do with McBride's delivery. He's not an Angelo Agrizzi. He isn't a showman. And yet a lot of his allegations are profoundly serious and tie up not only with what we heard from Jacques Poe and the President's Keepers, but also what's in that panel report that was sent to the presidency in March about the SSA.
Yes, absolutely. Now let's go to the front pages. We've got the City Press this week speaking about the list. Now this is, of course, a story that we're all very familiar with. They're saying here that Didi Mabuza and Gwede Mantashe are the two that are being targeted. And of course, this is a further explanation of the factional battles that are continuing in the African National Congress. What do you make of this story?
Well, what I thought was interesting is towards the tail end, referring to the comments from former President Kgalema Motlanthe on the structures of the ANC and his claim that because of the hierarchy within the governing party, the Ethics Committee doesn't have a mandate to interrogate NEC members. And yet the report that City Press is going with and the lead it's going with is about members of cabinet. And so there is a bit of a clash there. President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking yesterday, Eyewitness News reporting on his comments about the list and saying it's not finalized. And yes, City Press is going with a number of people, including, I think, importantly, former Social Development Minister Bathabile Dlamini. We know there was an inquiry into her role in the Sasa debacle, and interesting that they're saying her name is one on the list. Not Esma Khashule, interesting, considering the recent book with allegations against him and his actions in the Western Cape yesterday.
Peter, you wanted to talk about the VBS story. It's also on.
Yeah, it's in Sunday World, and I think I saw it in the Sunday Times as well. Floyd Chivambu's brother is being sort of chased by the VBS curator.
Belatedly chased.
Yes. To pay back loans that he owes the bank, basically. I don't know. I don't know where this goes to. Whether this takes an investigation to Floyd. I don't suspect that the curator of the bank would be doing anything like that. But it's the beginning of some trouble. This young man owes about 5.5 million rand.
Does this have implications for Floyd Chivambu? I mean, he is very high up on, for example, the Economic Freedom Fighters' list.
I think he would argue not, and the Commander-in-Chief would probably argue the same thing. The alleged sins of the brother are not the alleged sins of the deputy in the Red Berets. But I think what is important is that in the Sunday Times story, they highlight that despite Advocate Muntao's report finding around 16 million rand misappropriated and obtained by Floyd Shivambu's brother, the curator is currently only going after a loan for Sekhameka projects, which Boli van Wyk of Daily Maverick has reported on quite extensively and exhaustively. But I don't think the EFF is going to take on the mantle of responsibility over the serious claims about money from VBS.
We've got space for one last story, Peter. What is it that you want to talk about?
There wasn't really much, but and it was a bit of a shock to see it, but Mzikumalo, I last saw Mzikumalo about 20 years ago.
Yes.
And he was actually really good company. But he's a proper miner, you know what I mean? He's a big risk taker, entrepreneur, businessman, etc., etc., etc. And he seems to sort of have come to the end of the road.
Yeah. In Zimbabwe, of all places.
Well, he went to Zimbabwe a long time ago because he thought he could mine there, not here. It was too complicated, the mining legislation, and he appears to have run out of money. I'm sure someone that wealthy doesn't ever run out of money. But, I mean, to own a mine, you need.
So do you think he's going to reinvent himself as something else?
I don't know. When you're in your 60s, as I am, you start getting tired of reinventing yourself.
It's time for us to wrap the show, of course. Just a quick bite, Erin. Johan Boyson, the former head of the Hawks, takes the stand tomorrow at the Zondo Commission.
We've still got to finish, Rob.
Yeah. What can we expect?
Well, we do know, for example, that he's previously disclosed his investigations into business people in KwaZulu-Natal, links allegedly to Edward Zuma, the son of the former president, and some of the pushback he says he received while he was working in the Hawks and investigating politically sensitive matters. A very contested province, a very significant province for the previous administration and obviously for the ANC going into the election. So I think we can expect more on that theme.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erin. That's all we have time for you this week. You've had your fix for the week. Take care. See you again next week.